There is ample historical evidence to support the view that the sinking of the Titanic was inevitable. Rather than being a random accident, it is believed to be the inevitable result of multiple artificial and structural factors coming together. The Titanic had a large displacement tonnage. There were nearly 180 workers loading coal into the furnace to fuel the ship. There were 900 crew members on board, in addition to the passengers. There was an overconfidence and arrogance in the technology behind the Titanic. At the time, it was advertised as an unsinkable ship. The crew and the company were prioritizing prestige and speed over safety. As a result, despite multiple iceberg warnings, the ship did not slow down. The Titanic sank on April 14, 1912. There were multiple radio reports that there were many icebergs in the surrounding waters. Other steamships near the Titanic also warned the Titanic of the iceberg. However, the ship's radio operators were so busy sending messages to passengers that they ignored the important warning. In other words, the radio operator gave priority to the passengers' private telegrams. In response to the iceberg warning, the Titanic apparently told them not to talk to them. As a result, iceberg warnings were not properly conveyed to the wheelhouse. The captain also failed to properly recognize the seriousness of the sinking in the early stages. A fire broke out in the coal storehouse before departure. This may have weakened parts of the hull. It was also a moonless night and visibility was poor. This made it difficult to see the iceberg, which was also a factor in the collision. The Titanic was traveling at nearly maximum speed despite the iceberg-filled waters. It was a simplistic idea that if you spot an iceberg, you just need to avoid it. There is also a theory that they were aiming for the fastest record, and if they had slowed down, they would have been able to avoid the collision. The binoculars were stored in a locker and the key to the lock was lost, so the binoculars could not be used at the time of the accident. Because they could not see it with binoculars, they were late in discovering the iceberg, and were unable to take evasive action in time. Only half the capacity of the lifeboats was on board. This is partly because the expansion was postponed because it would have made the building look unsightly. Although this was legally acceptable, it was insufficient in practice. Additionally, they didn't fill the boats at first. In a scene from the movie, Titanic, the musicians on board did not evacuate. They continued to play for the passengers, but this seems to be a true story. They end up failing to escape and all die. The Titanic was carrying 2,224 people when it struck the iceberg. The bow of the ship hit an iceberg, causing seawater to seep into the waterproof compartment. The ship sank 2 hours and 40 minutes after the accident. The accident resulted in 1,514 deaths and 710 survivors. Subsequent investigations revealed that if the ship had avoided the iceberg just 30 seconds earlier, it would have avoided colliding with the iceberg. From the above, it can be said that the iceberg was merely the trigger, and the real cause was on the human side. If any one of these factors had been different, the sinking of the Titanic could likely have been avoided. However, these problems occurred simultaneously, resulting in tragic results. There were multiple factors that combined, and if even one of them had been improved, it is highly likely that the damage would have been significantly different. That is why people say that it was meant to happen. However, historically, safety standards have evolved significantly as a result of major accidents. We must recognize that technology is not a panacea and that risks always exist.